Okay, let's go and talk a little bit about some of the events during the Cold War. The Cold War is a period of hostility between really the Soviet Union and the United States, or the USSR and the United States, without any really open aggression. And this is a time period where there's a lot of stuff going on in the United States, not just in foreign relations wise between Russia and the U.S. itself, but also internally, domestically, things like civil rights, the civil rights movement, as we understand it in the modern sense, has its roots here early in the Cold War. Obviously, you can trace things way further back to the 1920s and even back to the Civil War if you'd like. But for what we think of as Martin Luther King, the modern civil rights movement, this really gets kicked off here in the beginning of the Cold War with the Truman administration when Harry Truman himself decides to go ahead and integrate the military or put black units and white units together. He gets anti-lynching legislation pushed through. They try to eliminate the poll tax. It's during this time that you get the first African American baseball player to play in the major leagues, Jackie Robinson, who played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. You also get the passage of the Fair Deal by the Truman administration. It's really an extension of the New Deal. It does things like raise the minimum wage. It increases Social Security. It goes ahead and tries to get rid of slums in cities and replaces them with new housing projects, which themselves become slums and become synonymous with poverty and with inner city decay. They try to go ahead and do environmental projects, not environmental in the way we think of it, but things like irrigation systems and flood controls. In other words, they're building dams along rivers. And back then that was viewed as environmental because we were improving the environment, as opposed to now where you almost find a movement to get rid of some of those dams, to let the rivers return to their natural state. But now turning and focusing primarily on foreign policy, you get the development by Harry Truman of what becomes known as the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine is really containment. The idea is that we weren't going to go ahead and we weren't going to attack any communist governments that already existed, but we would have opposed the formation of new communist governments anywhere else. And because of that idea, because we were going to oppose the spread of communism wherever we found it, um, we ended up getting involved in places like Turkey and Greece, where there were communist insurgencies, and we choose to support the governments that are there. In both cases, we send military aid to both Turkey and Greece to help tamp down the communist insurgencies in those countries. And we have success with that. Unfortunately, that kind of serves as a model for future engagements, places like Vietnam, where it doesn't work so well. But in the case of Turkey and Greece, it works, and we prop up governments that are friendly to us and not friendly to the communists. This is really the beginning of the Cold War, if you will. Uh, Other big event in the Cold War is the development of the Marshall Plan. It's named for George Marshall, even though it was actually some of his staff that really came up with the idea. So it wasn't his particular plan. His plan kind of got shot down, but he was the Secretary of the State at the time, so the plan bears his name. And what was happening after World War II is there were incredibly harsh winters, and Europe was in fact starving. And a lot of countries were starting to look for anybody who was willing to help, and they were, in some cases, turning to communists. And so we were afraid that more Western European countries, besides the Eastern European countries that the Russians had occupied following World War II and were now communists, we were afraid that other countries would also go ahead and become communists. And so, in order to head that off, we offer the Marshall Plan, which is basically we offered as much aid as you needed, as much money, as many supplies, for really only two conditions. And those conditions were trade with the United States and to trade with your neighbors. Russia was offered the plan as well. Russia refuses. They see it as economic imperialism. In other words, we're just going ahead and trying to spread our influence not militarily, but rather we are trying to spread our influence using economic means. The net result of the Marshall Plan is the economies of Germany, of Britain, of France, of Italy turn around. And those countries don't turn to communism, and they stay our allies. And so the Marshall Plan, for the most part, is successful. Other early events in the Cold War, the Berlin Airlift. What had happened was Berlin had been divided amongst the Allies following World War II, just as Germany had. And when France, Great Britain, and the United States bring our zones back together of Germany, we form West Germany, and then East Germany stays Russian. Well, we've done the same thing with Berlin. We divided the city into four sections. The three Western allies go ahead and reform and recombine theirs, but East Berlin stays separate. Well, after a while, it becomes apparent that West Berlin's doing well, East Berlin's doing not, and people start to leave East Berlin, start to leave East Germany. and this is embarrassing to Russia. And so they go ahead and they blockade the city, and they say, we want Berlin. It's in our zone, because Berlin was squarely in the middle of the Russian zone, and we tell them no. And so they blockade the city, and we have a choice. We can either try to run their blockade, in which case that we're going to shoot, or we can fly over it, and then they have to shoot us down. They become the aggressors. So we choose to fly over. And this effort lasts for 327 days, almost a whole year. By the time it's all said and done, 277,000 flights will have occurred to try to keep Berlin a viable city. 2.3 million tons of supplies were flown in during that time. One of the little PR gambits that the United States was able to or a PR coup, if you will, was able to pull off was something called the candy bomber. One of the things that did not get flown in was candy. So there was really no candy in Berlin for the space of a year. And this one particular flight crew thought that was abhorrent. And so when they would go back to England, they would stock up on a couple boxes of candy. And on the trip over, when there was really nothing to do, they'd tie little parachutes. And as they came over the edge of the runway, they'd dump all this candy out. And the little kids would be down there watching the planes come in. And they'd all scurry about trying to pick up the candy. And Americans looked like such nice guys. And Life magazine carried the photos, and it was a good PR opportunity for the U.S. You also get the formation at this time of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a defensive military alliance that is mostly Western Europe, Iceland and Canada, and the United States. Basically, NATO's our team. NATO is the U.S. and its allies, and we basically agree to defend those NATO countries against Soviet aggression. So if the Soviets invade, the United States will come to the aid of its NATO allies. That's the basic idea, or at least how it starts out. And then in response, the Soviets like, well, if you have a team, so do we. So in 1955, in response to the formation of NATO, the Soviets formed the Warsaw Pact. It's, again, basically the Soviet Union and its allies. It's the Soviet Union and the Eastern European nations, countries like Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Those were all members of the Warsaw Pact, Bulgaria. And so, again, the Soviet Union and its allies. And those are the two basic sides throughout the duration of the Cold War. You have NATO and you have the Warsaw Pact.